Hi, my name is Jarrett Kulm, also known as JK47 on Twitter or IRC and Reddit. And I just wanted to share with you one of my passions, and that's security. And most importantly, especially at NetApp Insight like I'm here today, is storage security. Now, why should we care about storage security? Well, recently commissioned studies have shown that data loss accounts for $1.7 trillion annually. I mean, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of companies going out of business, a lot of downtime, and just people getting access to data that they certainly shouldn't have. And even if we do our jobs as best as we can, we're still fighting a battle against aging hardware or just issues that we have no real ability to control. So we definitely have to be diligent and we have to be well armed with our education. But sadly, training budgets are going down, and a lot of people, they just don't get the funds or they don't have time to go to trainings that they might need, and especially storage security. When I talk to my customers or other people at NetApp Insight, very few have focused specifically on training for storage security. And when there are problems, it definitely rolls downhill. It's not going to be your executives, your CEO or your CTO to take the fall for a possible issue or a data loss. That rolls downhill to your sysadmins, your mid-level management staff, and you will be at fault for these issues even though someone's passing the buck. And we can't be too confident. I mean, when you think about it, 1,700 companies were surveyed and they had data loss. These are enterprise companies doing the best that they can. 69% of all companies had data loss in the last 5 years. Even the biggest enterprises, things like floods, fire, hurricanes. And this is one of my customers. They never thought that they would flood. They were about 10 feet above a river. Water had never gotten that high, but just one storm, 1 year, took out their data center. So it doesn't matter how much you prepare. You have to be ready for the unusual to happen. And to be honest, our staff, we have to fix their mistakes quite often. So of all the people that I helped with CryptoLocker, many of them had things like NetApp storage arrays where they had snapshots, they could do snap restores and get to data back quickly, but a lot of customers, they simply weren't planning to go back far enough, or they might not have licensed certain features like snap restore. So if a problem occurs like a Friday night, are you going to see it by Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday? And are you holding on to enough snapshots? And really, this does come down to a storage security issue. 51% of all attacks are financially motivated, but 14% of all attacks are revenge. So that means even some of your own people might be the hacker or the problem that you're trying to defeat. And there are ways to get around this if we are proactive enough. So if you have Windows for a file server, you can use the File Server Resource Manager. If you have NetApp or others, you can do things like F-policy or integrate antiviruses and detect it before these things become a major catastrophe. Now, there's a lot of terminology. Here we see all the terms from SNIA's storage dictionary. And some of them we know, like SAN and NAS. But others, we have a lot of newcomers like Object. That's Amazon S3 or Swift or NetApp Storage Grid or this one or that one. And you have to protect those just like any other web storage resource. Now, a lot of us don't think about protecting our storage as a web server that's online, like fronted to the internet, but that's a new trend in the industry. And we also have a lot of new oddball players in the market, which are becoming a big headache with storage security. So I'm talking things like hyper-converged or just all of the VSAs out there, the storage virtual machines. Now, when we look at hyper-converged, there was one certain manufacturer that had a special card in there to do write acceleration. Well, they couldn't patch it for almost 2 years because they couldn't get their drivers certified from VMware 5.5 to 6.0. And that's definitely a huge problem. That comes down to, you might think it's easy, but in the end, it's a security nightmare. We have to look at all the basis and really cover it. Make sure that if you do have one of these oddball players, that you are protecting it, you are pushing that manufacturer to update often. And here we see there's a lot of players, and this doesn't include any of the open source. So this is just some of many out there. And many of these manufacturers, they have 3 or 4, maybe more storage platforms, and that's a lot that we'll have to learn. So with this, with there being so many fights, so many battlefields, what worries me? Well, the one thing that worries me the most, which is a good and a bad, is directly integrating your storage with the cloud providers. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but if it's not protected right, it's an open door to the hackers into your environment. If it is protected right, it's a great way to burst your compute or advance your business. Another worrisome trend are things like Docker containers running from within a SAN. Many of these SAN have up to 1 terabyte of RAM or dozens of cores, and you want to make the most of them. So what's going to happen when we have to start learning how to protect what containers are running from within our SAN? It's something that we have to start thinking about today. And of course, VMware. I love VMware. A lot of people love VMware. I've been using it since the first beta of Workstation, but it's a huge security problem if it's not managed right. So what do you think are some of the weaknesses with storage systems? When I've given talks like this, I've heard a lot of different things. It's like, oh, RAID failures or this or that. And I'd have to say it's because every single storage system on the market actually runs a standard operating system at its core. So we have some that run Linux, some run FreeBSD, others run Solaris or Windows. And these systems can get 0 days. So here we have a very expensive solid state array by a certain unnamed manufacturer. And when Shellshock was released, I could actually get root level access instantly on the array. And they wouldn't even admit that it was a problem for over a month. So what about passwords? I do a lot of audits of my customer environments and health checks. And because Star Wars was my first step into security when I was little, I sort of like to compare their environments to things like the Death Star. Obi-Wan was able to get in and totally pwn the Empire simply. There were no locks, no passwords, no security shutting down the tractor beam. And most customer environments, they never change their install passwords. Or if they do, they'll do things like integrate it to Active Directory, but they will just give the domain level admins access to the entire environment. Bob might be a great Windows admin, but he's a storage idiot. Don't give giant groups access to your SAN. And what about storage benchmarks? Well, a lot of people love to run them. And storage admins, I'll admit it, we can be huge egomaniacs. So one of the ones that are growing in popularity is like VDBench, but it can be a little bit difficult to run, so a certain company made HCI Bench, Hyperconverged Bench. Well, if we just look at some of the things they've done in the past, it wants full vCenter access, and it's going to create VMs for you. Cleaning them up was optional for the first 1.5 years of this out. So that's a huge issue. You have a lot of new VMs being spawned up because you're testing your storage and no way to protect them. So this is good, and it's very, very bad at the same time because they disabled the firewall. And there's a lot of Java Web Services that we're running. This is just something to test your SAN. And it's a giant open door into security problems. So you didn't have to log into it, root level access. These VMs would stay out there for a long time if you didn't check a box. I mean, this is a perfect pivot point for a hacker or if someone were to run Meterpreter in your environment. Now, virtual appliances are everywhere. Most storage manufacturers, they have things like VASA providers or monitoring and benchmarking tools. So who's actually verifying and auditing these? Are they within your change control? And I gave a local talk at a university about this, and I just grabbed one sysadmin from their environment, and I looked at his LinkedIn profile. From this, I know every single version of every bit of software he runs, the SAN, so it's an open door for me to know exactly how to target them, get in, and steal all their data. And of course, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the cloud. So it's sort of like having Lando Calrissian as a best friend. It's a blessing and a curse. And the perfect way to describe the difficulty with storage security in the cloud is with a company called CodeSpaces. They were an online repository, sort of like GitHub. Well, they were DDoSed one night and it lasted about 12 hours. Now, it was actually a red herring because behind the scenes, the hackers were deleting every bit of data this customer had, and they might have been split between multiple regions in Amazon, but they had no immutable copies of their backups and data. So everything was purged in a 12-hour window, and this multi-million-dollar company was shut down overnight just because of one hacker. Now, that was a security issue with their storage. Because everything was under one roof, all their eggs in one basket, it was a storage security problem. That's why things like NetApp Private Storage or being able to snap mirror between Cloud on Tap or your local headquarters or an Equinix with NetApp Private Storage, it gets your data out of those cloud providers. And when you think that AWS or Azure, they can go down, what if you could actually run Oracle RAC or SQL between both cloud, like a RAC node at each Azure and AWS? You have cloud fault tolerance, and you can replicate it back to your own environment. This gives you the ability to maintain ownership of your own data. This gives you the ability to fail over between the cloud providers if you would burst up into them. It gets more security in your environment because you can control it and you're not leaving everything to that no name, no face cloud provider. And of course, tapes aren't going anywhere, but people aren't protecting them how they should. I'm all for immutable backup copies. If something were to happen, if there was a flood, if there was a fire, how are you getting your data back? Or if someone did something like corrupted your data and that was replicated across, all your replicants do you no good. It's, do you see it quick enough to have a snapshot? If not, you're going to have to go back to some sort of other type of hard copy. And most attacks, they don't get reported for the SAN layer. It's not that it doesn't happen. I mean, look at Sony. It's that we don't know how to audit it, and it's so much auditing data. But why is this? It's, well, most times auditing tools or monitoring tools are the first thing to get cut from a budget. So we have to make sure that we fight for the tools that we need to secure our storage environments, even if it might not look like there's profit in it. I mean, it's a hard fight to upper management, but it might just save us a lot in the long run. And I just want to quickly go on encryption. You've been hearing a lot about it, especially the new NetApp volume encryption that's out. Well, the Death Star plans were stolen because of an unencrypted satellite communication. And we have a lot of layers of encryption adoption that even down to what's encryption. I mean, I have customers, mom and pops or those that have grown, they don't know what it is. They don't know how to action it. And that's the reality, but companies like NetApp are making it more easy for us to implement and cheaper too. We have to implore our vendors that security must be a first thought in all the designs. And there's a lot of ways they're going about it. I mean, we have a lot of different types of hardware, and the companies are doing it differently between every single platform. So it's hard to make sure that we have full coverage in our data centers, top to bottom of our data being encrypted. So we have to make sure it's easy, it's cheap, and it's comprehensive. And speaking of cheap, we have to be very careful of doing it on the cheap. TrueCrypt was a perfect example of that. Every sysadmin, every hacker in the world loved it until we realized that, hey, this is exposing all of our data and our encryption keys, and we only saw that 4 or 5 years later. So again, be angry at our vendors. Make them be accountable to our data. Make them be accountable to our security. I mean, we look at the protocols they're using. NFS, for example, old version like version 3, 1995. That's the year Kevin Mitnick was arrested, Microsoft Bob was released, and the movie Hackers was in theaters. So we need new things. VMware supporting version 4, okay, but they're using a cipher from 1993, which not even Windows 7 will support. And it doesn't work with most of their products. So SMB and CIFS, yes, NetApp did great things with SMB3, Microsoft's doing great things with SMB3, but if we look at enterprise environments where we have WAN accelerators those will downgrade your SMB levels from 2 to 1. Or even certain SAN and NAS platforms will downgrade your protocol from 2 to 1 if it sees a problem. And iSCSI authorization and authentication. Well, on Windows, you can box reveal the password as almost any user level. So it doesn't matter if you're using CHAP or not. It doesn't matter if you're protecting it, because anyone that has access to that box can see your password. And I've seen this used, and the password was the domain admin's password. So just be very careful of what you're doing. I'm not saying don't encrypt with CHAP. I'm saying protect it. So that's all I really wanted to cover. I just want to thank you all. If you have questions, definitely shoot me a tweet or direct message. And I love talking storage. I love talking security. I'm out here with the NetApp A team this week at NetApp Insight, and then also the Tech Field Day Extra. So I hope to hear from you. Thank you.